Yo, good day everyone. And in today's episode of Growing Your Tree of Prosperity, I'm going to try to answer the question in my usual manner as to whether investing or buying Bitcoin is gambling. And the background as to why I'm trying to answer this question is that actually the only issue that is worthy of deeper discussion that arose during our recent elections in Singapore is a statement from PAP candidate Goh Soo Kee that because no government backs Bitcoin, investing or buying Bitcoin is akin to gambling. All right. So in this episode, we will look at whether buying to gambling or the Toto, or blackjack, or is it a credible investment like investing in equities or bonds? Okay. So before I begin, we need to have a proper definition of gambling and investing, right? And if you do not agree with my definition, then you probably wouldn't agree with the content of this video. All right. So if you look at examples of gambling that includes blackjack, poker, for when you gamble and you're playing blackjack, your expected returns are negative, right? So if you were to go to a casino and you play blackjack, there is a particular situation where for every dollar that you gamble, your expected return is only going to be about 95 cents. So these expected returns are negative, right? But if you are investing and you were to perform investments in stocks, bonds, you're buying properties, or you're picking up commodities, generally speaking, you are getting expected returns that are positive in value. So if you were to buy stocks from around the world over a long period of time, like 20 years, you can expect 6 to 7% returns. All right. So I think that is a very fair way of differentiating between gambling and investing, right? So if we were to look at expected returns on Bitcoin, then it would determine whether they are a gamble or they are an investment. Okay, so I've done a little bit of coding and I was able to get some statistics on the Bitcoin ETF GBTC that has the longest history for backtesting. And we find that returns are in fact positive. All right, so that sort of closes the case on whether Bitcoin is a gamble or it's an investment. All right, but I think what's useful are the other numbers that I have on this slide, because we also want to know why conservative people, mainstream politicians think that Bitcoin is a gamble, right? So if you look at some of the numbers here, the thing that jumps out at you is that the returns are extremely high, but so are the annual standard deviation, right? When you have a standard deviation of about 85%, we are talking about a risk that is 4 to 5 times that of buying in ordinary stocks, right? So some people think that this is very risky and therefore it's a gamble, right? A more subtle way of trying to understand why people mistaken Bitcoin to be a gamble would be to look at this number known as the annual skew, right? On the annual skew row, you see 0.303, right? A positive number means that if you invest in Bitcoin, there will be occasional moments in time where you make a lot of money, right? That's when Bitcoin goes to the moon, right? And most of the time when you invest in stocks and shares, the annual skew is a negative number, right? So losses are pretty damaging when you buy stocks and bonds, but it is actually a positive number for Bitcoin, right? So it will resemble a lottery payoff. Most of the time you lose money, but when you strike 4D or Toto, you make a lot of money, right? So people and human beings and our brain is conditioned to look for investments or actually gambling deals that have a positive annual skew. So that's another reason as to why we think that Bitcoin is a gamble. And the final reason is obviously if you look at the maximum drawdown of 89.91%, what it's trying to tell you that if you buy Bitcoin at a peak and Bitcoin crashes after that, you can lose up to 90% of your money, right? So this is a very risky investment, but obviously the annual returns of 135% makes it very attractive to people like the crypto bros in 2020, right? So these are the people that only invest in Bitcoin, okay? And look how far these people have come, right? Okay, so in my view, how can we invest in Bitcoin very well? I think that the solution is that if you're looking at Bitcoin, um, both positions are extreme. If you label Bitcoin a gamble and you say that we shouldn't have anything to do with it, we shouldn't have a single amount of allocation into Bitcoin, I think that is wrong. However, if you were to behave like a crypto bro in the 2020s and you go Bitcoin to the moon and you put 80 to 90% of your net worth into Bitcoin, that's wrong as well because the crash can wipe out a significant amount of capital that you have, right? I think a good middle ground recommended by some financial planners in the US is to just put 1% of your portfolio into Bitcoin, right? So what I've done is that I've simulated a 60-40 global bond and global stock and global bond portfolio, and I wanted to observe over 10 years what it would be like if we come up with a way to add 1% of Bitcoin into that portfolio. All right. So if you look at my numbers here, you have a 60-40 portfolio, and starting at $10,000, after that period of time is over, you get $16,000, right? But if you just put 1% into Bitcoin, you will get $1,000 more, right? And so your annual return would go up from 7.8% to about 8.9%. So 1% can make a very big difference, right? And I think that is good enough. Why do you need your returns to be so high when it can actually increase the volatility of the portfolio? The standard deviation of this arrangement is it remains very low at around 11%, which is something that is about 50% to 60% that of a ordinary investment into stocks, right? You improve your best years, but your worst year you lose about 0.5% more, and your maximum drawdown increases to about negative 21%, right? Something that is easily manageable. But most importantly, the risk-adjusted return with a 1% allocation into Bitcoin can improve your Sharpe ratio from 0.5 to 0.57. All right, so I think very clearly what we are seeing is that adding Bitcoin into a traditional 60-40 portfolio can actually improve its performance, right? And I think that is a very good starting point for not just fund managers or retail investors to think about adding Bitcoin to their portfolio. It's something that I think a government should not dismiss, right? Simply by calling out Bitcoin as something that's not backed by anything else, doesn't have a proper use case, and then you dismiss Bitcoin. I think that's also not the right kind of approach. All right, so to summarize my presentation here, Bitcoin is in fact an investment. It is not a gamble. All right, however, I don't blame politicians for thinking that it's a gamble because the standard deviation is very high and the skewness does create the impression that it's a little bit like a lottery. Okay, but I have a lot of backing that Bitcoin has generated positive returns, and so it is a valid investment. All right. The second point is that there is a suitable middle ground between going all in like the crypto bros and not going in at all. And the middle ground, in my opinion, is to put 1% into Bitcoin, right? And 1% into Bitcoin, as I've shown, there are consequential improvements in terms of returns, right? And you can result in a better risk-adjusted return or Sharpe ratio. Okay, and so the independent candidate suggestion about getting our government to put some funds into Bitcoin is justified. Okay, but from my point of view, it has to be very small, right? For a country to actually jump into Bitcoin, it may be wiser to make sure that we have the systems in place to, for example, secure the Bitcoins, right? If we decide to put in our ledger, right? And there has to be a team to look after the asset allocation. and make sure that the money doesn't get stolen. And um, there might be certain algorithms that can be run to actually trade Bitcoin using a trend follower sort of algorithm. Okay, and so that's all I have, right, for this particular video. All right, remember, personal finance is personal. All right, and you can use my presentation to determine whether you can allocate some of your funds into Bitcoin as a separate asset class. If you'd like to help me, I think the best way of helping me is to simply subscribe to this channel. I can begin to monetize it once I get 1,000 subscribers. You can also buy me a coffee at the link here. If you want to listen to my life story and figure out how the financial independence and retire early movement works, sign up for my free course preview by following the link here. Google ERM intro and take the first link. Thank you very much.